Everybody, welcome to the Route Consultant weekly webinar for the waste industry. My name is Josh Gregory. I am the Vice President of Education here at Route Consultant. If you've never heard of us before, if you've met us previously, our team ran one of the largest FedEx operations in the country and have over a decade of experience valuing, selling, and consulting on logistics businesses in a bunch of different silos. Now, the goal of these webinars are to help all of you understand the opportunity here in the waste industry. Now, what we're going to be doing on these, if you haven't been here, is we're really here to provide some content. We want you to learn about this industry. We want you to be here and ask questions or send those questions to us afterwards. And then if you do decide that this is something interesting for you and you're trying to take that next step and accelerate your journey into this space, that's what we want to be here for as well, to really help you feel comfortable and move forward if this is the right fit for you. Now, if you do come to these live, if you're here live right now, we will have a Q&A at the end where any questions that you may have, you're completely welcome to ask and type those in at any point while I'm talking. Just if you want us to answer them, make sure you put it in the Q&A box at the bottom. If you put it in the chat or if you raise your hand, I'll miss it. So if you want your questions answered and asked, make sure you put it in the Q&A while I'm talking. But like I said, the focus for today, we'll start with some content. So we've said it before and we'll say it again, that one of the best things about this industry is that everyone has trash and everyone needs help disposing of that. But your individual customers in this space and the characteristics of their businesses and their waste can really dramatically impact the needs and profitability of your business. So we're going to talk through all of that today and how different customers can impact how successful you are in this space. And we've brought Tommy Turbeville back on to help. Tommy has decades of experience in this space, both operating and analyzing these businesses. So Tommy, I see you there. Why don't you go ahead and say hello to everybody.
Hey, everyone. Good afternoon.
Perfect. So good to have you back, Tommy. And I was out last week, so good to be back. But there's lots of different businesses, lots of different types of customers in this space. But just to start to make it simpler for people, what's the easiest way to start to break out these segments for the purpose of today's conversation?
Yeah, the easiest way is based on the different lines of business, just because the types of containers or not containers in residential, but it's the different lines of business.
Okay, so the residential, commercial, industrial kind of thought process, those three lines of business, it's what we've often divided in. It makes sense for this conversation too. So let's start then with residential. Let's keep it simple. So what are the main different types of considerations that come to the types of wastes that you can see at residential stops?
Yeah, I mean, the most common is what people throw in their trash can inside their house. I mean, that is definitely the most common. But the other thing you need to be aware of and make sure you specify is things such as yard waste. Because individual households, their landscaping, whether it's grass, whether it's trimming the shrubs, they have a tree fall down, those types of things. And then the other is just like small construction projects. They're doing something and they have, some pieces of drywall or lumber that they want to get rid of. So it's really important that you identify what you're going to pick up, because if you don't, then spring, fall cleanups of yards can be a big issue.
Yeah. So for defining those types of things, do you normally see that people, when they're starting out, they're just like, I'll take anything? Like, are there pros and cons to that? Do you think that it's easier when you're starting out to say, none of the big stuff, I just want residential trash, the stuff in your houses? What's your advice there?
Yeah, most people, I would say, have some type of, for the subscription side, when you're doing it, municipal contracts, it depends on what they're asking for. But most people say, hey, it needs to be in a bag or something that can be in a regular trash bag to be able to get rid of it. And if you're providing carts, if you have some type of automation, it really increases your time if they have stuff that's outside those carts too. So most of the time, that's how it's identified. And then you let them know, hey, yes, we can do this, but we may have to charge extra. That's a good way to do that, so they don't feel like, well, when I do have this type of material, then what do I have to do? Because it's a great thing to be able to offer that, but I would do it, with some type of special charge depending on the body.
Yeah. So yes, extra revenue is great, but you just got to make sure there is extra cost for you in that. So you got to make sure that you're pricing accordingly, which we've talked about before. So we think about it as just, oh, residential trash. It's the same for every type of house. But what are the different types of stops that you might make when you're thinking this residential category, and what are some of the different implications from that?
Yeah, so when you think about the residential service and you're speaking of houses, the most common is just single dwellings where it's an individual house, but then you have duplexes, quadplexes. There could be some condominiums that get involved, and even small apartment complexes. When you start getting into large condominium complexes or large apartment complexes, typically they're going to go and have some type of container.
Okay, got it. So I think about it as all these houses are the same, but do you ever have to deal with stuff like super long driveways or things like that, or does everybody just make it really easy for you to access their trash?
Well, I think, and again, that comes from how you define what you're willing to do on the front end.
Mhm.
Most common today for everyone, even in a lot of rural settings, is it has to be at the street. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is it helps keep your costs down, but also a big truck getting on driveways. I mean, there could be some liability issues associated with that. You don't know, what the driveway is made out of. You get a heavy truck on there, could be issues, but then just access. So most of it is right there at the street. That is by far the most common today.
Okay, so thankfully there's kind of a standard either. Obviously, it's something that you can require as a part of what you're offering, but there is at least the mindset that just because someone has their own private property behind a fence, that there's some way to make that trash more accessible to you.
Yeah, yeah, and that's very important to make
Yeah.
sure you have easy access.
Yeah, yeah, because I can imagine a lot of if you have an area with some very crazy houses where they have a fence and security, that there's still kind of the idea that they're going to make it easier for you to access. But when you're thinking kind of low income versus high income territories, are there differences there that people should expect, or is it all kind of the same?
Well, it same but different.
Okay.
Same in that they typically have the same amount, same type of waste, but the amount of waste could be very different. Most people would think, and it really boils down to the number of people living in the household.
Yeah.
It's really what it boils down to, and so how do you know that? Well, different communities. I mean, they tend to have more family oriented or older income, things of that sort. But I would also tell you, most people would probably think that the demographics, a wealthy neighborhood versus a more poor neighborhood would have, the wealthy would have a whole lot more trash, but that's not necessarily the case. And a whole lot of times in the impoverished neighborhoods, they throw away all kinds of stuff. Um, and they may be a little bit more of a throwaway type society type stuff, paper plates and those types of things. And so the demographics, although you would think they would have some impact, really don't. It really comes to the number of people in the house and what they have.
Do you ever get any kind of census data from a municipality to know that type of breakout in terms of people per territory, or is that all just kind of learned context and experience?
Well, it's some of both. If it's a municipal contract, you can basically take residents and divide it by the number of units and get that type of number. Uh, but for the most part, your community is going in, or you're moving into a new subdivision. You can go down the street and you can kind of tell just by driving around. Is this more family oriented? Is it older? Those types of things. It's just kind of knowing and paying attention to what's going on around those houses.
Gotcha. Okay. So now, not all stops are exactly the same, but if you could pick, on the residential side, what are the best types of areas or stops in a perfect world?
Yeah, I mean, a big thing in residential is your density. So that is always good. But I guess if you wanted to pick the ideal customer community, it would be a retirement community, just to be honest, because you have one or two people in the household that don't generate a whole lot of waste. And since you're figuring in averages of disposal based on what they may have, you go and one where you pick up, 6 to 10 bags of trash in one location versus two, it's a big difference. And I tell folks it's funny when I go, my daughter has 4 kids, and when
Mhm.
I go to her house and it's trash day, there is a pile out by the street where sometimes my wife and I just have, a couple of bags in there, and the guys love it, I'm sure, when they come to my house.
Yeah, I would say that all we have is a couple of trash bags, but we also have all those Amazon boxes that tend to arrive every day that I just don't know where they come from and that so I've got that pile. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Only a couple of bags of trash between my wife and I, but cardboard waste, I would say, is a whole separate category. We haven't even talked about recycling and what that is, but we can save that for a future webinar. Now we talked about density and low trash because it's great. You're still getting paid for the stops you're doing, and you're not having a big expense from a bunch of additional waste in the retirement community. But what would you say are some of the more challenging types of homes when it comes to residential?
I would tell you the high income or the large high value homes
Okay.
are more challenging. And a lot of that is just because their expectations and their view of the waste collectors is not that great. And so, a piece of paper's in their yard on trash day, they're going to assume and probably going to call that your guys let something fly out of the truck. Again, it's possible, but
Yep.
that seems to be the more challenging, and where you get the most calls and issues related from. And it's just related to phone calls.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. That there's a certain level of expectation that just makes your job more challenging without really giving you any benefit.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I think that about covers residential. So let's move on to industrial next. So, we kind of talked through the different types of waste you can expect on residential. How is it different for industrial?
Well, I think as it comes to industrial, because they are large containers, although there's a specific business segments they're in, they're also very different. Meaning, for example, the open top roll off containers are primarily used in construction. uh, where when you start getting into the compactors, there's two different types. So the stationary are going to be, the industrial, the manufacturing plants, the ones that produce or package things, because again, they don't have wet waste for the most part. And then you have the self-contained that are going to be the large grocery stores, the large apartment complexes. So really, but that's really the categories that you're dealing with in those, the large volume that have food, that would be, hey, have wet waste apartments. Again, a lot of the big box retailers now have their grocery departments, and then large grocery stores. That's primarily where that market is, the industrial manufacturing for the self-contained, and then the roll-off market. The other thing that's really different here, where in the residential and commercial, you have to think about your disposal cost, because because it's all mixed in. You have many customers mixed in when you go to the disposal site. Here, you just pass that along because it's one customer, and whatever you pay, you're able to pass that cost along.
Hmm, got it. Okay, so you don't care as much about the weight of the trash in industrial?
No, you really don't, because you're able to pass that along. So it's really not an issue of a certain type of customer and the type of waste they have. It's just being able to pass that along, and being able to access, and making sure, though, because most of these should be priced somewhat individually because it's a dedicated truck to a dedicated customer. The biggest thing is to make sure you have a good pricing model.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because if you're kind of taking your disposal out of the equation, then it's really just filling up the container and doing that as efficiently as you can, which is a lot simpler of an equation than trying to calculate how your expenses change with the weight of the waste that comes in and out of your business. Now, on the industrial side too, you kept mentioning wet waste. Does that, if you get a bunch of that, does that change anything at all? Like, are there different ways to dispose of it, or different things you have to deal with when there's a bunch of that?
Well, and again, we're still talking about solid waste, so it's stuff that comes just from consuming. So it's not a waste from a production environment. That's a whole different animal. But it is that issue. You want to make sure, at an apartment complex, at a large grocery store, what they throw away, stuff decomposes, it creates a liquid. And what you don't want is that liquid, over a period of time, because many of those, they may not get serviced but once a week. As it gets up, it starts leaking out, and it will create a very foul odor, which of course, nobody wants to be around. And so you have those self-contained containers, and what they are, the compactor and the container it goes in are all attached. And there's a seal, a rubber seal around the back door that keeps the liquids in there. So there's nothing that breaks apart for you to service. When you take that to the landfill, you're picking up the compaction, the compactor itself, and the container.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I now know the liquid of which you speak. It is the liquid that seems to find its way into trash and is never fun. And it makes sense. Yeah. Now, hazardous waste, you're saying it's a whole different kind of consideration. Is the liability on you as an industrial waste collector to make sure that there's no hazardous waste in there, or is the liability on your customer to not put it in there unless they tell you?
Well, it really should be on the customer, but that is why it's important to have an agreement.
Yeah.
uh,
Okay.
it identifies that, when it talks about, I tell folks, when you look at what you say you will pick up in an agreement, there's more of what you won't pick up that talks about, medical waste, hazardous waste, those types of things, and making sure it's clear, because should something get in there, you want to make sure they maintain the title to that waste, and it goes back to them rather than you.
Yeah, so that's super important when you're thinking about customers. It should be a part of your agreement regardless, but if you're working with someone that you think there's a chance that that type of material could be a part of it, you need to make extra sure that everybody's on the same page there about what is and is not allowed in the dumpsters. So I guess along that point, what would you say are the kind of the best types of customer on the industrial side?
Well, I would say probably on the construction side would be a new single builder development. And the reason I say that is because it's one builder, and what they will do is they will place multiple containers throughout, and they'll have, 4 or 5 houses, they'll use that. So, they're going to get the volume. But the biggest part of that is that they typically have roads of some sort already in the area, some type of base that's there. So your trucks aren't going through mud. They have typically have a good place to drive, to pick up the containers. And so there's less impact on your equipment in that regard.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And those relationships can continue over time. Okay,
Right.
now on the flip side, what's the most challenging?
Um, I'm going to give you two. One is on the construction side, which is a brand new build. It's a single build of some sort, because typically in those, if it's a single facility or even something like a strip mall that has multiple tenants in it, initially there is no place. I mean, it's just raw land and it's had equipment in there. And so, the place to get it is very, how to get to it is rough on your truck. There's a chance of getting stuck. The other part of that is on the new, as on the front end of the new build, is they may want to move the container. And so most of them have heavy equipment. And so they move the container. So there's a chance of damage there. There's a chance of your truck getting, those types of things. So on the construction side, you just need to be very aware that that's what happens on the front end. Once it gets going, you typically don't have those issues. And then the other, I would say, the one that's the most challenging, it is only challenging if the self-contained compactor goes down, which is the one that maintains that, because you have very limited options because they have high volume. And if you put an open top, there's no seal, the liquids are going to run out. And so the only reason it's a challenge is just because, if that compactor's down for a couple of days, your recovery is limited to do it and do it well.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. That it's the pros and cons of using that. It's a good container that prevents the leak, but when it breaks, then you got nothing. So yeah, I hear you on
Right.
that. Perfect. Okay, I think that covers industrial. So let's go to this last line of business. So the commercial side. So what, how wide of a range are we talking about here? What kinds of wastes are we thinking about?
Well, when you talk about, in the commercial side, the front loader containers, there is basically every type of business segment imaginable that
Hmm.
uses that, because it's any and every type of business that has that, that's not, huge volume. So yes, we talked about, grocery stores. Yes, they use, the commercial front loader containers. Apartment complexes use those. Even small manufacturing facilities could use those. But that's, your retail, your service, your service industries, your convenience stores, your fast food restaurants, your fine dining restaurants. So basically any type of business that you see, I mean, car washes, I mean, whatever that um, is going to use these types of containers. It is a huge variety of types of customers you're gonna service.
Got it. Which I imagine has its own challenges just in terms of expectations of what the waste can even look like. So are there different things to consider here than we have in the previous segments, or is it basically just the same thing but more?
Well, I would say the type of waste and the weight of the waste is much more important here, because in a household, national average is 45 pounds per house per week. But when you start talking about, the different types of business segments,
Yeah.
what would be thrown away at a small office complex or a small retail establishment that's in a strip mall versus a fast food restaurant or any type of restaurant. Yeah, I mean, that weight could be 5 to 7 times more per yard than
Mhm.
the other. And so, because so let's take a small retail establishment. I mean, they're throwing away packaging material for the most part. As product comes in, they're unpackaging it. And so they're getting rid of the packaging. There's not food waste, there's not anything of that sort. And I would tell you, they don't neatly stack everything in the dumpster. They get it, they throw it. So it's, I mean, so it's very light when you look at it on a cubic yard basis, versus a restaurant per se that has, all the food waste, all the stuff that's not getting done, the stuff they have to throw out at the end of the night. is much heavier. And so in that regard, it could have a significant impact on your profitability and how, your pricing, because again, all of those are mixed together when you take it to the disposal side.
Got it.
And
So you don't
so,
pass through those costs like you do in industrial, right?
right, because you've got, several customers on that truck when you go.
So when you're thinking through the commercial side, what's the best way to decide which types of businesses to add? Does it all come down to pricing, or are there truly businesses that you would avoid altogether or make sure are a part of your portfolio?
Well, I would not, discard any type of businesses because again, in the transport, anything in the transportation industry, density is important.
Yeah,
And again, not as, I hesitate to say this. I was going to say not as critical to have a good pricing model as the, industrial that we talked about, but it is. And if you use good averages with the various mix, you're going to be okay. Some will just individually they will be more profitable than others. But I would say, if all you had were restaurants, then you'd need to price that accordingly. But typically you look at it at a mix. So it really depends on if you've got a good mix. If you stay in a any business segment, you're going to have a mix of everything.
got it. Now, do you get to dictate what those dumpsters look like at these businesses? And in terms of like, do any of these restaurants have self-contained dumpsters, or are you getting some of that wet waste no matter what because they get to decide?
Yeah, you're going to get the wet waste regardless because the health departments, that's one of the things they check, and they make sure there are, most of these containers have a drain plug in them, but it is not an option for that to be out at the restaurant because that's something that the health department will get them on. So, for the most part, they're self-contained. When you dump them, whatever's in there is going to end up in your truck. So,
Yeah. And that comes back. I know we've talked about it before, but just remind me because I'm thinking about it right now. How long or how involved is a wash of some of these vehicles with the amount of kind of trash and things that you're trying to clear out the inside of, and how often do you do it?
Well, I think it's important because again, that's your billboard, for
Yeah,
the most part, that's your rolling billboard. And I would say it's different based on the types of the different industries. Residential is not, I mean, for the most part, they don't get very dirty. If you're using a rear loader, they're in the back. It's just, typical dirt from going down the road as a car would be. So whatever you're comfortable with in that regard. The industrial, the only situation they get in a lot of muddy construction sites. So you want to keep that clean. The front loaders are a different animal. I would tell you need to have something at least a couple of times a week because as you're dumping that waste over the cab into the truck, I mean things are gonna spill and are gonna get on it, and I would tell you at least a couple of times a week. Yeah.
okay. Do you ever wash out the inside of the truck?
Yeah, you do, but again, most of these you get the majority of the waste out because either it pushes it out and there's drains when you go to the landfill, but yeah, there's still times things are going to get uh, you know in front of the blade, and you want to make sure you clean those out and spray it out because again, in the heat, it will you will know it's there if it hadn't happened.
You will get a reminder that you need to wash the inside of the truck, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, I think that's really what we wanted to cover. And so just conceptually, everybody, the different customer types you have are going to dictate some things that you have to consider. And it really should start to impact your business plan when you're deciding the types of stops that you may want to add. As Tommy said, density is good, so it may be worth adding any of these types of stops, but you got to make sure that you're thinking through your expenses and your pricing accordingly so that as you're adding volume, you're not just losing money to add volume. So I think all of these different considerations around residential, commercial, and industrial are really important both to understand kind of what a day in the life looks like and to think through your profitability. So Tommy, I think that was really great advice and experience for everybody here. Just a couple of quick things that I want to highlight as a reminder. One, if you are out in the Baltimore area, we'll be there next week on June 4th. We'll have a happy hour out there with free food, free drink. If you want to come meet our team, we can give you all those details if you're interested. We also, the big event that I always want to highlight is we have our expo coming up the first week of August, August 2nd through 4th in Dallas, Texas. Completely free to attend. You just got to make your way out there and get a hotel room. But we'll provide the food, the drink for multiple days of content where you can meet with logistics professionals in this industry and others to learn about what's affecting the industry today and where things are going in the future, and really make sure you're investing in yourself and your business and networking as you're trying to make sure you're running the most profitable business you can. Plus, like I said, free food and free drink for a few days is always a good time. So hopefully I'll see all of you there. Tommy, thank you for being on this week. And for everyone who's on and watching live, we will see you next week on the next webinar.